The door is already open. Cool air spills from a stone corridor. Your torch shakes. On the wall, marks like waves, or snakes, or family lines refusing to end. A name is scratched there, then crossed out. Another is carved over it, then another. You hear it, like a whisper passed hand to hand. The blood did not break. A ring glints from dust, set with a tiny red cross, a seal on cracked wax, a lock that was meant to stay shut. Letters hide under old leather. Some are prayers, some are warnings. A few read like maps. Follow the marks. They run from river reeds and long hair shining with oil, to kings who ruled with dreams, to monks who copied what they were told to burn, to vaults under Rome where clerks file what no one may see. Listen closer. The names change. The line does not. A marriage here, a child there, a death that was not the last. Deals in candlelight. Blessings that sound like bargains. A crest stitched inside a robe. A symbol cut small on silver. If this lineage survived, what else slipped the blade? Welcome to the hidden hallway between throne and altar, where whispers grow into chronicles. The forgotten bloodlines, from the Merovingians to the Vatican. Close your eyes. We begin. Start in the middle. A man bends over a river. He is said to be born of two fathers, one of flesh, one of the sea. His line grows long hair as a pledge. They wear bees as a sign of favour. They claim a gift that kings cannot buy, the strange right to rule by blood and dream. Some call them the Merovingians. From here, paths spread like veins. One road leads to a young ruler who takes a cross and a crown on the same night. Another to a child hidden after a murder that solved nothing. Another to quiet houses where women keep books inside bread baskets and pass messages in the hems of gowns. Some of these stories are fact, some are faith. Many are warnings. Across the Alps, a city of keys keeps a vault of paper and memory. The Vatican records births, deaths, land, heresy, mercy. It preserves, it withholds. It knows that a single line on a single page can change the weight of a throne. So the doors are heavy, the air is cool, the light is kind. This audiobook is a night passage through those corridors. We will not stop to argue every date. We will follow the strongest threads. We will ask simple questions. Who needed this line to end? Who needed it to live? What was paid to change a name? What was saved to change a future? You will hear of kings shaved and sent to cloisters, of clerks who made errors that were not errors, of seals that break only when the right hands are warm, of orders born to protect a rumour that might be a truth. We will move softly, we will keep our eyes open, and when the path splits, we will note both ways. Settle in, breathe, let the old names speak. If the blood remembers, the night will too. The river moves slow at first, wide and brown, carrying reeds and the silver of fish scales. It bends like a serpent and hides its depth beneath calm ripples. A man stands at the edge, half warrior, half myth. The air around him is damp with the smell of moss and iron. His hair is uncut, heavy on his shoulders, darkened with oil, as if it carries more than weight, like it holds the proof of his birth. People whisper that he is not born only of man and woman, but of something that came from beneath these waters. A creature, a spirit, a being that gave him the right to rule not through land or coin, but through the very blood in his veins. This is where the line begins, not in a palace, but on a riverbank. The Merovingians claim a strange parentage, part human, part otherworldly. They trace their origin to a union said to be impossible, a meeting between flesh and a river spirit known only as the Quinator. Some call it a beast of the deep, horned and shining, who chose a Frankish queen by chance or by fate. From that night, a child was born Merovech. His name carried the river inside it. His heirs would carry the mark, though no one could say for certain what that mark was. Some said it was a gift of sight, others a a gift of endurance. Many believed it was nothing more than long hair, flowing past the shoulders, never cut, never trimmed, because to cut it was to sever the bond with the unseen father. In the villages and halls of the Franks, men swore by their swords and their cattle. But when they swore by the river-born line, silence followed. There was power in naming a house that claimed not only to descend from man but from myth. People looked at Merovingian kings as if they stood with one foot on earth and one foot in water, rulers of the seen and the unseen alike. The long hair mattered. It was not fashion, it was oath. The Merovingians were called the long-haired kings. To touch their hair was to touch their right to rule. Mothers brushed it with oils before coronations. Warriors swore loyalty with their hands upon it. Even enemies feared it. As if to cut it was more than humiliation, it was desecration. When a king was stripped of power, they shaved him. Not only his head, but sometimes his beard, his very body, until he was bare of all the symbols that tied him to the sacred current. Shorn of hair, a king was no longer a king. He became a monk, a prisoner in a cloister, a man with no claim. Yet deep down the people whispered, the blood still pulsed, river strong, hidden under the skin. Legends grow in silence. At night, villagers told stories of the Merovingians, as if they were half saints, half sorcerers. They ruled not only by sword, but by dream. They spoke with visions. They were said to touch relics without fear, to heal fevers with a glance, to know secrets of men who never spoke them aloud. These gifts made them more than rulers. They were guardians of a mystery. The Roman Church watched carefully. Rome did not trust kings who claimed descent from rivers and beasts, from unions not written in scripture. Faith in miracles belonged to saints, not to dynasties. Yet the people loved these kings. Their loyalty was not to parchment or decree, but to a story sung by the river, repeated by mothers to children, carried in symbols carved into stones. The bees, for example. The Merovingians were said to keep bees as sacred emblems, golden insects whose hives echoed the harmony of their rule. Bees appeared on banners, on seals, on coins. Some said they were found buried with kings, tiny figures of gold placed near the heart, reminders of an eternal bond between ruler and nature. Later dynasties would take lilies, but the bees remained older, more primal, closer to the earth. Bees pollinate, create honey, survive as a single body made of many. The Merovingians claimed the same. They were one line, one hive, guided by a queen, but fed by countless unseen workers. Merovech himself is shadow. His life is only fragments, victories, alliances, the line he began. His body rests under soil no one can agree upon. Yet his bloodline, whispered and retold, stretches through centuries. What mattered was not his deeds, but his origin, the union that birthed him. To be a son of both man and spirit was to stand apart, untouchable. The Franks at that time were not yet an empire. They were clusters of tribes, bound by custom more than law, fierce in battle, hungry for land. But the Merovingian kings wove them into something stronger. They did it not only through war, but through faith in their strange right to rule. The belief that they carried sacred blood was enough to make tribes unite, to bend to their word, to see in their hair, their bees, their crowns, more than human authority. But sacred lines invite envy. To claim a river father was to claim a throne no other family could reach. It meant power by nature, not by election or conquest. For neighbours and rivals, this was unbearable. For the church in Rome, it was dangerous. Sacredness belonged to relics, to priests, to saints canonized by councils, not to kings with long hair and strange tales of water beasts. Yet the Merovingians endured. Their story spread across valleys, into abbeys, into the songs of minstrels. The deeper the story rooted itself, the harder it became to erase. When kings fell in battle, the blood survived in their sons. When dynasties cracked under betrayal, the blood whispered in daughters and hidden heirs. The line was always there, running like the river itself, sometimes in sight, sometimes underground, but always moving forward. At night, mothers told their children that kings could not die as long as the river flowed, that the blood was not water but fire hidden in water, glowing under the skin. That one day, when needed, the line would show itself again, like reeds parting to reveal a child on the bank. This is how it began. A river, a myth, a child named Merovingian. His heirs carried hair as their crown, bees as their emblem, and whispers as their shield. From this first current, the story of forgotten bloodlines flows. A crown of metal weighs heavy, but symbols are lighter and last longer. The Merovingian kings knew this. They carried bees, tiny creatures, gold in body, tireless in work. To most, a bee is simple. It stings, it gathers nectar, it makes honey. But to the Franks, and especially to the long-haired kings, bees whispered something more. They stood for order, community, and divine blessing. Archaeologists, centuries later, would uncover golden bees buried with rulers, their wings still glinting beneath earth. They found them stitched into garments, pressed into wax seals, etched into rings. To some, they were marks of wealth. To others, they were signals. For in the hive, every bee serves the queen, every bee belongs to the whole. This was the metaphor the kings wanted. Not scattered tribes, but a single people bound together, fed by the same sweetness, defended by the same sting. When a Merovingian king entered a hall, he did not come alone. He came with banners embroidered with bees, with warriors who bore them on shields. He came with priests who whispered blessings over honey poured into chalices, as if the drink itself carried sacred order. People saw this and believed their kings were more than warlords. They were keepers of a divine balance, a hive that worked because it was ordained. There were stories that bees followed these rulers, swarming where they slept, resting on their hair without harm. Whether true or not, such tales built power. The common people repeated them at firesides. Children listened wide-eyed, and so symbols became stronger than any sword. The blessing of bees was also practical. Honey was medicine. It was food when harvests failed. Wax lit the dark churches where prayers rose. To carry bees as a mark was to show control over light, health, and sweetness. It meant the king gave not only laws, but life itself, in forms people could taste and see. But blessings never travel alone. A blessing is also a warning. Bees may gift honey, but they defend their hive with fury. The same kings who smiled at their people could call armies in their name. Enemies learned that to touch Merovingian land was to risk the swarm. And when the swarm came, it was relentless, organized, a living storm of iron and cries. The church watched. In Rome, lilies were more fitting than bees. Lilies were pure, holy, tied to the Virgin. Bees were older, more pagan, too close to earth and soil. Yet the Merovingians would not surrender them. Even when priests blessed their crowns, even when psalms were sung in Latin, bees buzzed at the edges, a reminder of roots deeper than Rome. This stubbornness became a quiet contest. Rome sought to plant lilies. The kings kept bees. To many, it seemed a small matter of symbols, but symbols are never small. They tell people who they are, what they follow, and whom they obey. For as long as bees flew with Merovingian kings, their rule felt separate, older, closer to the soil than to the altar. A child born into this dynasty was shown bees before he was shown swords. Mothers pinned them on swaddling clothes, whispered of their blessing. Nurses dipped honey on lips as a sign of sweetness and strength. It was said that a child who tasted honey in his first days would grow to lead, that to starve a child of sweetness was to starve a nation of peace. And so bees lingered, not only in banners, but in stories. A man could lose his land, his title, even his name, but if he carried the bee, he carried memory of the bloodline. Even centuries later, when others took power, bees resurfaced on tombs, in forgotten chapels, in coins struck by rulers who half admitted, half denied their tie to the long-haired kings. The blessing of bees was never erased. It moved quietly, like honey itself, slow, golden, enduring. It clung to stone, to fabric, to the whispers of people who said, "This line is chosen, the blessing cannot be taken, the hive will return." The hall smelled of wax and wool. Candles lined the altar, dripping slow rivers of light. A crown waited, metal forged for warlords, heavy with gems taken from trade. Beside it lay another crown, not of gold, but of oil, a vessel waiting for anointing. Tonight a king would not only be crowned in rule, but bound to faith. The moment marked a shift. To place one crown is to rule men. To place two is to rule bodies and souls. A Merovingian king bent his head, and the bishop poured oil thick and fragrant, oil meant for prophets and priests. The crowd saw this and gasped. This was not the crowning of a soldier, this was the crowning of a chosen one. From that night on, kings were not only rulers, they were almost sacred. Rome smiled, for it seemed at last the long-haired line bent to the cross. But beneath the smile was worry, for if the king could be crowned with holy oil, did he not then stand almost as high as priests? Did he not claim heaven's blessing for himself? The ceremony was theatre, and more than theatre. A child watching would remember the shimmer of oil, the chant of psalms, the moment a man became untouchable. To strike at him would be to strike at God's will. This was clever politics. It wrapped power in holiness, making rebellion not only treason but sin. Yet the people wondered, which crown weighed more, the iron circlet of worldly rule or the invisible crown of divine favour? Could one be taken without the other? Could a king lose his throne but still claim sacred oil on his skin? These questions lingered in cloisters, in market talk, in the silence of rivals who plotted. Rome hoped the answer was simple. The church gave, the church could take. But the Merovingians lived in both worlds. They claimed river fathers and bees. Now they claimed oil. To the people, it seemed they carried blessings from every direction, nature, earth, and heaven. This made them strong, too strong, and so two crowns became a double edge. They gave the dynasty a glow no sword could cut. But they also drew eyes sharper than any blade. Bishops began watching closely. Monks began copying records with careful hands, and every rumour of scandal was written twice. For if kings could wear holy crowns, the church needed to remind all that it was the keeper of heaven, not them. In that hall of wax and wool, few noticed. They only saw a king transformed, lifted by chant and light. The night of two crowns was triumph, but also the start of suspicion. For when power wears both gold and oil, no hand can ignore it. The Merovingian king rose from his knees. He looked taller than before. The crowd shouted, voices rising into the rafters. Some cried for him as king, some whispered he was more. And in that echo, a seed of conflict was sown, a seed that would grow in silence, watered by ambition, fed by fear. The crowns gleamed, the candles guttered, the people believed, the church remembered, and history bent beneath the weight of two crowns set on one man's head. History often names fathers, kings, warriors, chiefs, men who signed their names with blades. But behind the Merovingian line were women mothers who carried blood across thresholds, who whispered names into the ears of infants, who kept records not on parchment but in memory. Without them, the bloodline would have been lost. Queens sat beside kings, yet power shifted in their hands in ways not always seen. A mother in this dynasty was more than caretaker. She was guardian of legitimacy. If a son was born, she ensured the world knew. If a daughter was promised, she brokered alliances. She could hide a child, or parade him before nobles, depending on which path ensured survival. The Merovingian queens understood the stakes. If blood was sacred, every birth was political. A mother's womb was a battlefield no army could march upon, but one that decided futures. If a child came safely into the world, the line endured. If not, whispers spread of curses, of lost blessings, of God's displeasure, and so these women endured the gaze of nations upon their bodies. Clotilde, wife of Clovis, is remembered as one of these figures. A Burgundian princess, she carried not only her own blood, but the weight of 2 kingdoms. Her marriage brought legitimacy to the Frankish king. Her baptism brought Christianity to his court. But her greatest power was not in sacraments. It was in how she wove her children's futures. She raised them to know they were not merely heirs, but instruments of destiny. When her sons quarrelled, she was there to remind them of their duty. When her line faltered, she prayed, not only to saints, but to ancestors, whispering that the river blood could not be broken. But mothers of the line were not only queens. Concubines, nursemaids, and widows carried secrets too. In times of crisis, children were hidden in cottages or convents, disguised as foundlings. Women knew how to vanish a child into obscurity, only to bring him forth again when the storm passed. This art of concealment preserved the line when daggers sought to end it. These women also carried memory. When monks erased names from charters, when scribes bent ink to favour rivals, mothers kept truth alive in lullabies. A cradle song might hold a genealogy, names sung softly as if only for sleep, but in truth they were records. They told a child who he was, who he came from, and what he must become. In an age where parchment could burn, women's voices preserved the unbroken chain. At court, queens arranged marriages. At hearths, they arranged survival. They taught daughters to carry symbols in embroidery, to stitch bees or lilies into hems where only the faithful would see. They taught sons to braid their hair long, to never cut what marked them as chosen. They carried relics close to their bodies, hidden under garments, trusting that a scrap of cloth or a drop of oil could protect not only a child, but an entire dynasty. The church tried to sideline them. Official records named kings, bishops, abbots. Yet even Rome admitted the weight of queens when coronations required their presence, when alliances demanded their signatures. Behind closed doors, bishops knew that to cross a Merovingian mother was to risk a dynasty's wrath. And so, through centuries, the mothers of the line kept the blood flowing, the stories breathing, the names remembered. Kings rode to battle, monks copied texts. But in bedrooms, nurseries, and hidden chapels, women guarded the treasure no vault could contain. The bloodline itself, power rested in hair. It seems small, a matter of vanity, but for the Merovingians, hair was sacred. Long hair marked a king. To cut it was to cut the line itself. And so, when rivals sought to destroy a ruler without killing him, they reached for the shears. The ritual was brutal. A captive king would be dragged into a cloister, his crown stripped away. He would kneel, forced under holy pretense, while monks shaved his head. The hair fell to the floor like a kingdom crumbling. Without it, he could not claim the throne. He became a monk, bound to prayer, stripped of weapons, his body confined within stone walls. To the outside world, he was finished. A shaved king was no longer a king. He was a husk, a man neutered of power, hidden away. Rome approved of this method, for it seemed clean, bloodless. No murder to avenge, no martyrdom to fuel rebellion, just silence, a man erased by scissors instead of swords. But the people whispered otherwise. They said the blood still pulsed. That hair would grow back. That a man, shorn though he was, remained riverborn, marked by bees, kissed by oil. They saw the practice as sacrilege, a theft of sacred symbols, not a true end. And so rumours of restoration grew. One story tells of a king hidden in a cloister who secretly wore a wig of his own hair, smuggled by loyal servants. He prayed by day, but by night he rehearsed speeches of return. The people believed that one day he would emerge again with hair flowing, reclaiming the throne. Whether true or not, such tales mattered more than facts. They kept the hope of blood alive. Enemies feared this resilience. To kill a king might spark vengeance. To shave him was safer, but never certain. Hair grows, blood remembers, and in the dark, conspiracies brewed. Monks whispered of prisoners who still received secret messages, still plotted. Nobles hid coins stamped with their likeness, preparing for the day of return. The practice of tonsure revealed much about the tension between sacred and royal power. The church claimed shaving as holy, a sign of humility before God, but in this context it was weapon. The blade of scissors replaced the blade of steel. Rome wrapped political punishment in religious ritual, masking politics as piety. Yet this weapon cut both ways. To the faithful, stripping hair seemed cruel, unnatural. A king humiliated in this way inspired pity, sometimes loyalty fiercer than before. Stories of shaved kings became legends of endurance. They symbolized a truth that no scissors could cut. Blood does not vanish with hair. In villages, children heard tales of kings who would one day return. In noble houses, daughters prayed for the restoration of their fathers. In secret letters, allies plotted rescues. The shaved king became a symbol of resistance, proof that sacred blood could be suppressed but never destroyed. The scissors clinked, hair fell, monks chanted. But beneath the surface, the bloodline endured. Kings were more than hair, the river still flowed. Every dynasty fears silence in the nursery. A cradle empty, a cry stopped too soon, a bloodline broken before it grows. For the Merovingians, the fate of one child could decide the fate of nations. And so, when a child vanished, whispers spread like fire. The story varies in retelling. Some say it was an heir hidden from assassins. Others say it was a daughter spirited away to marry in secret. The details blur, but the theme remains. The line nearly ended, but one child lived. In a time when murder solved succession, children were not safe. Rivals poisoned cups, set fires, sent knives in the dark. A single infant could threaten thrones, and so loyal families learned to hide them. A boy might be placed with shepherds under a false name. A girl might be sent to a convent, her hair cut to disguise her, her true blood whispered only in prayers. One tale tells of a child smuggled in a basket of grain carried across mountains. Another of a baby baptized under a false name, only to be revealed years later when the time was right. These stories may be legend, but legends protect truth when truth must hide. The church sometimes aided, sometimes silenced. A bishop might shelter a child for political gain, hoping to use him later as a pawn. Another might erase records, ensuring no trace remained. The Vatican learned early that a single child, hidden or lost, could unravel carefully spun order. For the people, the lost child became a symbol. If the line could vanish, it could also return. At markets, travellers whispered of heirs still alive, waiting in foreign lands. Minstrels sang of children raised in secret, destined to reclaim crowns. Each rumour fed the belief that the bloodline could never be truly ended. And so, the lost child haunted history. Whether he lived or died mattered less than the possibility. His absence became presence, his silence became voice. Rivals feared him, allies hoped for him, the church prepared for him. The mere chance of survival was enough to keep power trembling. In the quiet of night, mothers told their children, somewhere the heir still lives. And with that, the dynasty endured not only in blood, but in hope. The lost child may have been one, or many, or none, but the story of survival carried the weight of truth. For in every generation, someone whispered that the line was never truly broken. The cradle may be empty, but the bloodline walked on, sometimes in shadow, sometimes in light, but always alive. The glow of fire lit the cloisters, smoke rising into the rafters as parchment curled to ash. A monk lowered his eyes, lips moving in prayer, though his hands trembled. He had copied lines for days, bending his back over oak tables, tracing words in ink mixed with soot. He had preserved them carefully, binding them into neat stacks, and now he was told to burn them. The scribes of the age were keepers of memory, but also its destroyers. They copied kings into eternity, or erased them with silence. When the Merovingians rose, their victories, their decrees, their sacred ancestry were inscribed with reverence. When rivals sought to break them, scribes wrote differently. A name might be misspelled, blurred in the ink, lost in abbreviations. A date might be shifted so that one generation vanished. A child might disappear entirely from the page. To the outside world, history appeared unbroken, clean. To the monks who bent over the pages, the truth was more fragile. Each stroke of quill decided what survived, what burned. They knew it, even as they whispered prayers. Sometimes the order came from kings themselves. Rival houses demanded that Merovingian deeds be erased. Scribes obeyed, for obedience was survival. But obedience never came without hesitation. A scribe might slip a symbol in the margins, a B drawn small in the curve of a letter. He might copy a forbidden name into the wrong place, hoping someone later would notice. He might burn 10 pages and save one beneath his robe. Memory hid in such gestures, tiny acts of defiance buried beneath ink and ash. The fire was not only physical. Scribes burned with silence. They were trained to copy without thought, without question. They were told to erase when ordered, to seal when told. Yet their silence created gaps. What was not written became forgotten, and what was forgotten became as if it had never been. Still, stories survived. A child heard from his mother that his grandfather had been king. He grew up and told his son. That son told another. And in the monasteries, some scribes chose to write not for power but for posterity. They hid chronicles in margins, behind hymns, beneath layers of sacred text. To the untrained eye, it was scripture. To the careful reader, it was genealogy. The Vatican watched. Rome valued order above all. To them, scribes were guardians, not of memory, but of obedience. The official copy mattered more than the true story. What entered the archives became fact. What was erased might as well have never lived. But beneath that surface, other scribes whispered. They feared judgment, but they loved truth. They passed secret codices hand to hand, often at night, often under risk of excommunication. The scribes of fire lived between obedience and rebellion. They kept the flame of memory alive, even as their masters demanded silence. They watched kings rise, fall, and vanish into ash. They copied charters by day and dreams by night. Their hands shook not only from the weight of ink, but from the knowledge that history itself was clay in their grasp. The fire consumed much, but never all. For every parchment burned, another lay hidden. For every erased name, another whispered in the cloister halls. And so memory lived, flickering like embers, waiting for breath to rise again. A piece of parchment may seem fragile, a strip of calfskin, a surface for ink. But in the Merovingian age, charters drew blood. They decided who owned rivers, who tilled fields, who raised armies. With a seal pressed in wax, a man gained land or lost it. With a signature in careful script, a dynasty strengthened or weakened. The Merovingians ruled through force, yes, but also through paper. They granted abbeys lands to secure loyalty. They gifted churches privileges to secure prayers. Every charter was both contract and weapon. It could reward, punish, or erase, but parchment bleeds when cut too many times. A charter copied wrong could strip a family of wealth. A charter forged could move a border overnight. Nobles quarrelled less often with swords than with documents. Armies marched, but pens decided where they would stop. Merovingian kings placed B's or crosses beside their names. Their seals bore images that tied them to sacred origin. To break such a seal was treason, yet rivals did it anyway. Wax was melted, reshaped. Charters were altered in shadows, monks bribed to rewrite them. The result was chaos disguised as order. One abbey might claim a field for centuries, only for a new charter to appear, bearing a new seal, claiming that the land had belonged to another all along. Disputes filled courts, bishops acted as judges, but bishops themselves were not free of bias. They favoured families allied with Rome, weakened those who stood apart. In this way, charters drained the power of the Merovingians slowly, like a wound that bled over decades. Yet the kings fought back. They commissioned charters that affirmed their sacred blood. They granted privileges that only they could give. They used wax and ink as weapons, surrounding their rule not only with swords, but with scrolls. The Vatican watched carefully. It collected copies, stored them in vaults, and compared them with other records. Rome knew the danger of parchment. A single word could change centuries of inheritance. To control the charters was to control the kingdom. And so the church became keeper, interpreter, and judge. But paper holds more than power. It holds ghosts. Some charters survive with red stains, said to be blood spilled in disputes. Others carry notes in margins, curses written by monks tired of disputes. This land is cursed. One scribe scrawled beside a royal gift. Whoever claims it will know no peace. Whether superstition or truth, such words lingered, making parchment breathe with fear. The people knew little of these papers. They cared for fields, bread, survival, but they felt the results. A family evicted, a field enclosed, a tax raised, all from words they never saw. To them, the charters were invisible blades, cutting lives from far away. The Merovingian dynasty survived battles, but battles were loud but obvious. The true struggle came quietly, in ink and wax. Charters bled the lines slowly, reshaping loyalty, shifting wealth, until power slipped from long-haired kings to stewards, from stewards to Rome. And yet some charters whispered defiance. Seals with bees still appear, even in late centuries, hidden among lilies. Proof that somewhere someone remembered. Proof that bloodlines can be traced not only in veins, but in ink. The charters bled, but they also testified. They remind us that power flows not only through crowns and swords, but through fragile sheets of skin, preserved in vaults, still waiting to be read. The hall was dim, shadows stretching across stone. Only candles lit the chamber, their flames small, flickering. Around the table, men whispered. Their hands lay on wood, their eyes on one another, their words spoken in oaths that would never reach parchment. This was how dynasties lived or died, not only in wars or charters, but in vows sworn in darkness. Oaths in candlelight carried weight no scribe could measure. They bound nobles to kings, abbots to warriors, priests to causes. They were not recorded. They lived only in memory, sealed by fear of God and fear of betrayal. To break them was to risk damnation, not just disgrace. The Merovingians depended on these oaths. They could not rule every tribe by force. They relied on loyalty sworn in private, loyalty built on kinship, debt, or secret promises. A man might swear to protect a hidden child, a bishop might swear to suppress a document, a noble might swear to avenge a wrong. Each oath spun a thread in the invisible web that held the kingdom together. Candles flickered as men placed their hands on relics. Sometimes a bone of a saint, sometimes a cross, sometimes a lock of hair from a king. These objects carried weight beyond words. To swear upon them was to call heaven itself as witness. The oath became more than human, it became eternal. But oaths cut both ways. They united, but they also betrayed. A man who swore in one chamber might swear differently in another. Secrets spread like shadows, twisting through corridors. Loyalties shifted, and with them, the fate of kings. The church both blessed and feared these oaths. Rome demanded public vows, open to scrutiny, written and sealed. but it knew the truth. The real power lay in whispers. Bishops themselves made oaths at night, binding their fortunes to dynasties they pretended to condemn. The Vatican held records, but it did not hold silence. Silence belonged to the men who whispered in shadows. The people never saw these meetings, yet they felt their effects. A tax lifted, a marriage arranged, an army delayed, all from oaths they never heard. Their lives were shaped by promises made in candlelight, promises invisible yet unbreakable. The Merovingians leaned upon this system. They knew symbols were strong, but whispers stronger. They fed loyalty with gifts, bound enemies with oaths, held alliances together with words spoken over flickering flames. For a time, it worked. For a time, the line endured, wrapped in the invisible threads of whispered promises. But secrecy carries poison, oaths conflict, promises contradict, and when too many vows are sworn, trust dissolves. Men begin to doubt, whispers twist into rumours, rumours sharpen into knives. Candlelight becomes smoke. Still, the memory of those oaths lingers. They remind us that history is not only what was written, but what was promised. In dim halls, by candlelight, men bound kingdoms, and in breaking those oaths, they unbound them. Night fell quickly on the stone halls. Torches flickered, and footsteps echoed against walls lined with tapestries. The air was thick with the smell of wax and old smoke. In such places, plots ripened like fruit, left too long in the dark. A king might go to bed crowned and wake shaven, or he might not wake at all. The Merovingians lived under constant threat from within. Rivals preferred the knife over open war. A sudden thrust at a banquet, a poisoned chalice, a fall arranged at the edge of a stair, these were the quiet weapons of ambition. But where murder risked scandal, exile to the cloister served as the softer blade. To send a king to a monastery was not only to remove him from the throne, but to bury him alive. Tonsure stripped his hair, the sacred emblem of his line. Vestments replaced his robes. Silence replaced his authority. He walked the cloister gardens in prayer, while others sat in council, his life spent in shadows rather than command. Yet the cloister was never as secure as it seemed. The people remembered. They whispered of their king behind closed doors, calling him unjustly caged. Mothers told their children that their rightful ruler lived still, dressed as a monk, waiting for the moment to return. And sometimes these whispers were true. One story tells of a king whose followers smuggled messages into the cloister, hidden in loaves of bread or sewn into garments. Another tells of secret visitors who came by night to kneel before him, swearing that they still recognized his rule. In such ways, the cloister became not only a prison but also a sanctuary of rebellion. Knives and cloisters were two sides of the same coin. One ended a life, the other ended a reign. Yet both failed in the long run, for they could not sever blood. The knife could kill a king, but his sons lived. The cloister could confine him, but his name endured. The Vatican often blessed these removals, disguising politics as piety. Rome argued that cloisters offered salvation for rulers corrupted by ambition. But beneath this moral veil, everyone understood the truth. It was about power. Shave a king, exile him to prayer, and his rival ruled in his place. Still, the knife lingered as a last resort. When whispers grew too strong, when a cloistered king seemed too dangerous, men returned to steel. Blood stained cloister stones more than once, and monks wrote their chronicles carefully, avoiding names, recording only that a ruler passed from this life into eternity. The line endured despite knife and cloister. Each act meant to silence it, instead deepened its mystique. Kings became martyrs, prisoners became symbols, and the people remembered, whispering in markets, chanting in taverns, retelling by fireside, that no knife, no cloister, could erase the river-born blood. Symbols shift like banners in the wind, but their roots run deep. The Merovingians chose bees, golden emblems of labour and unity. They decorated their tombs with them, sealed their charters with their image, buried kings with tiny bees of gold laid close to the heart. Bees were older than Rome, older than lilies, tied to nature and to the hum of the hive. But time moves, and with time came new rulers. The Carolingians rose, displacing the long-haired kings. With them came a change of emblems. The lily replaced the bee. White, pure, a flower tied to Mary and sanctity. It was a symbol Rome approved, a mark of heaven rather than earth. Where bees spoke of nature and ancient blessing, lilies spoke of chastity and the authority of the church. This shift was not mere decoration. It was a campaign, a rewriting of imagery. By replacing bees with lilies, the new rulers sought to erase memory of the old bloodline. They wanted people to forget that kings once claimed power from rivers, from strange ancestry, from symbols rooted in earth. Instead, they offered flowers sanctified by Rome. Yet the bees did not vanish. They buzzed quietly in corners, resurfacing in hidden places. In forgotten chapels, bees appear carved into stone. In private seals, noble families carried them centuries after their fall from prominence. When Napoleon rose centuries later, he too chose the bee, resurrecting it as a link to the ancient past. He claimed continuity with the Merovingians, bypassing lilies, appealing to symbols older than the Vatican's sanction. The people remembered bees differently than lilies. Lilies belonged to priests, to altars, to clean robes and prayers in Latin. Bees belonged to the soil, to honey, to the hum of summer fields. They were closer, more tangible, less holy perhaps, but more real, and for that reason they remained dangerous. For the Vatican, lilies were safer. They were controlled, easily tied to scripture. Bees were wild, reminders of kings who ruled without Rome's blessing. To promote lilies was to promote obedience. To bury bees was to bury rebellion. But symbols resist burial. They rise like seeds, sprouting where least expected. Legends told that bees hovered over Merovingian tombs, refusing to leave, that their hives grew inside ruined chapels, buzzing in darkness where prayers had long ceased. Whether true or not, the tales endured. They reminded people that the line remained alive, buzzing quietly beneath the roar of lilies. From bees to lilies, the story was more than a change of emblem. It was the struggle between old sacredness and new order, between earth and heaven, between a bloodline rooted in myth and a crown granted by Rome. The shift tells us less about flowers or insects than about power itself. Whoever controls the symbol controls memory. Whoever controls memory controls destiny. But memory is stubborn. Bees still fly. Power slips quietly, rarely in one stroke. For the Merovingians, it slipped into the hands of their own stewards. The mayors of the palace began as servants, administrators who managed estates, collected taxes, commanded small retinues. They were supposed to serve kings, but service, given long enough, becomes mastery. The mayors learned the machinery of power while kings grew distant. Some rulers spent their time in ritual, relying on sacred lineage more than strategy. Others fell into cloisters or died too soon. In the gaps, the stewards acted. They commanded armies, judged disputes, spoke in councils. They became the face of power while kings remained symbols. At first, this arrangement seemed harmless. The kings were still crowned, still long-haired, still sacred. The mayors served in practice, but the bloodline still held authority. Yet over time, perception shifted. People began to see the mayors as true rulers, the kings as ornaments. The dynasty that once claimed descent from rivers found itself reduced to figureheads. One man, Pepin of Herstal, turned stewardship into dominance. He commanded as no steward before him had done. His descendants followed, culminating in Pepin the Short, who finally seized the crown outright. The Merovingians, shorn and cloistered, were pushed aside. The Carolingians rose in their place. This transfer was not sudden. It was slow erosion. paper by paper, charter by charter, decree by decree. Each time a mayor spoke instead of a king, each time a seal bore the steward's mark, the line weakened. By the time Pepin asked Rome for sanction, the kings were already ghosts. The Vatican approved the transfer. Rome saw little use for sacred hair and river myths. It preferred rulers who sought legitimacy from the church, not from legend. And so the papacy blessed Pepin, granting him the crown that once belonged to the long-haired kings. But this blessing carried shadow, for though the line lost power, it did not lose memory. The people whispered that the blood still flowed, hidden in daughters, in distant cousins, in exiled sons. The mayors had taken crowns, but they had not taken ancestry, and so, even as the Carolingians rose, the myth of the Merovingians lingered. The palace mayors won the throne, but they inherited its ghosts. Every crown they wore carried the weight of a bloodline, said to be sacred, unbroken, riverborn. History records the transfer as practical, kings idle, stewards diligent. Yet behind these facts lies a deeper truth. The Merovingians fell not to armies, but to their own servants. Power slipped in silence until the sacred blood sat in cloisters while mayors wore the crowns. The bloodline of kings was never carried only by swords or seals. It was carried by brides. Women who crossed borders in silk and wool, who arrived with dowries heavy in wagons, who stood in churches and whispered vows not only for themselves but for entire kingdoms. Their marriages were more than unions of flesh. They were bridges, paths that carried bloodlines across rivers, mountains, and time. When a Merovingian daughter was married, her body became a treaty. Her hand was given not for love, but for land, for peace, for alliance. The dowry she carried was often smaller than the hidden wealth she brought in her veins. Every child she bore could claim descent from the sacred line, and so, even when rivals sought to destroy the dynasty, it survived, tucked into the wombs of women who crossed thresholds as brides. Some marriages were arranged in daylight, celebrated with feasts. Others were whispered in secret, crafted in shadow. A girl might be promised before she was weaned, her life charted as a pawn in games of power. Another might be hurried into union after war, her wedding night a seal to prevent further bloodshed. Yet in both cases, the bride became a carrier, a vessel, a living document whose children extended the bloodline into new houses. These women were not always passive. Many understood their role clearly. They whispered names of ancestors to their children, ensuring they knew where they came from. They stitched bees into their garments, small reminders of the blood they carried. They passed relics in dowries, locks of hair, coins, fragments of parchment to keep the line remembered. Rome watched these marriages with care. The Vatican feared what they meant. If the sacred blood spread too widely, who might claim it? A noble in Burgundy? A duke in Aquitaine? A count in Lombardy? Each child born of a Merovingian mother represented a potential heir, a rival to Rome's chosen kings. And so, priests worked hard to control marriages, to bless some, forbid others, to channel the line in directions that suited the church. But blood resists control. A secret marriage might escape the notice of bishops. A daughter might be claimed as a nun, yet still bear children in shadow. A widow might remarry, carrying the bloodline into another house, unnoticed until generations later when the claim emerged again. Legends tell of one bride who crossed the Alps in winter, her dowry lost to thieves, her escort slain. She arrived in rags, yet the man she married bowed to her, for he knew her blood was more precious than gold. Their descendants later claimed a crown. Another story tells of a woman sent to a cloister against her will, yet she bore a child in secrecy, and her line survived where kings had failed. The bridges, built by brides, were quiet, invisible. No charters declared them, no armies marched for them, yet they endured. When the dynasty seemed to vanish, its blood reappeared generations later, pulsing through heirs who could trace their mothers back to Merovingian queens. And so, Though kings fell to knives, to cloisters, to stewards, the line flowed on, crossing through marriages, concealed in bridal veils, whispered in cradles. Every bride carried more than herself across the threshold. She carried the bridge of blood. Every path led to Rome. Stone roads built by emperors stretched across Europe, guiding traders, pilgrims, and kings alike. But for the Merovingians, the road to Rome was more than stone. It was a path of diplomacy, of gifts and letters, of appeals whispered in papal chambers. When kings sought legitimacy, they sent envoys south. When nobles disputed, they asked Rome to arbitrate. And when dynasties faltered, when sacred hair was shaved, when heirs vanished into cloisters, the Vatican became the silent judge. Rome kept its doors heavy, but it listened. Always it listened. The Merovingians knew this. They sent gifts of gold, of relics, of promises. They courted papal favour, not always from belief, but from necessity. A word from Rome could sanctify a crown or strip it. And so, the long-haired kings walked the road with caution, offering gestures of loyalty while keeping their own myths alive. Envoys carried letters sealed with bees. Some reached the Pope, others vanished on the road, stolen, intercepted, hidden in monasteries. Rome learned early that correspondence was power. To hold a king's request was to hold leverage. To delay reply was to test loyalty. To grant favour was to shape history. But the road to Rome was not only for kings. Bishops, abbots, merchants all travelled it. Whispers followed them, stories of lost heirs, of sacred blood, of dynasties rising again. These whispers reached papal ears, fueling caution. For the Vatican feared any claim of sacred origin outside its blessing. The Merovingians had always been dangerous in this way. Their river father, their bees, their hair they carried symbols Rome could not control. And so, when envoys arrived, Rome smiled politely but planned carefully. Sometimes it granted blessings, pouring oil on kings. Sometimes it refused, withholding legitimacy until another line offered better obedience. Rome's interest was never only in theology. It was in control, yet the road itself carried memory. Pilgrims who walked it sang songs of ancient kings. Inns along the way told stories of brides who carried blood across borders. At night, travellers whispered of charters burned, of oaths sworn, of kings hidden in cloisters. The road became not only stone but a channel of story, carrying memory as much as bodies. The Merovingians travelled this road less and less, as stewards rose, as Carolingians sought papal favour, but the line never left it entirely. Distant cousins, exiled heirs, wandering nobles, all walked toward Rome, hoping for recognition. Sometimes they found it. More often they found silence. Yet the Vatican kept their names. In vaults beneath marble floors, scribes recorded petitions, even when ignored. These records remain, silent witnesses that the line continued to knock on Rome's door. The road to Rome was never truly closed. It still echoes with the steps of kings, with the breath of exiles, with the hum of forgotten bloodlines, seeking recognition that never came. The Vatican rose as a city within a city, marble and stone layered over centuries, corridors twisting into shadow. Behind its doors lay the vaults, rooms sealed with keys, lined with shelves that breathed dust and parchment. Here was the memory of Christendom, preserved and guarded, but also hidden. The Merovingians haunted these vaults. Their charters, their letters, their petitions, all copied, filed, and locked away. The Vatican preserved them not for honour, but for control. Knowledge is power, and to keep it locked was to decide who might rule. Keys were not given lightly. Only certain hands could open the vaults, and even they did so rarely. By torchlight, they checked seals, whispered names, and recorded notes. They understood the weight of their task. A single parchment might shift claims to kingdoms. A single erased line might silence an entire dynasty. Rome collected everything, Gifts from kings, confessions from monks, accusations of heresy, genealogies written in careful Latin all entered the vaults. The church presented itself as eternal guardian, but behind this facade was strategy. By holding the records, it held the truth. By holding the truth, it shaped the story. The Merovingians feared this as much as they sought it. Their envoys sent documents to Rome, hoping to secure recognition. Yet, once inside, those documents belonged to the vault, not to the sender. The keys turned, the shelves filled, the dust settled. Generations passed before anyone else read them. Legends tell of secret rooms within the vaults, chambers accessible only by ladder and candle, where forbidden genealogies lie. There are whispers of parchments naming heirs long after the dynasty's fall, of bees sketched in margins by sympathetic scribes, of notes warning against suppression. No outsider has seen these chambers, but the rumours persist. The people imagined the vaults as treasure chests of knowledge. Some saw them as prisons, where truth lay shackled in darkness. Either way, the Vatican held the keys. It decided what was revealed, what was silenced, what was destroyed, and in this, it held power greater than kings. The Merovingians, though dethroned, lived on in those shelves. Their presence lingered in ink and wax, in charters folded and sealed. The line that could not be erased by knife or cloister was stored instead in shadow, not gone, not destroyed, simply hidden. And so, the vaults became a second tomb, a place where kings lived in paper rather than flesh, waiting for hands to turn the keys, waiting for light to reveal them again. The candlelight trembled as the ink dried. A monk dipped his quill again, careful with each stroke, careful not to let his hand betray what his heart felt. Before him lay a ledger, no ordinary book of accounts, but a record of names. Names of those accused, condemned, erased. To write in this ledger was to decide who belonged to the church and who belonged to the fire. The Merovingian line, with its whispers of sacred descent, often drifted close to this ledger, for Rome had little patience with kings who claimed holiness without papal sanction. A ruler could be forgiven for greed, for cruelty, for war. But to claim divine origin outside the church was heresy, and heresy could not be allowed to grow, so the names were written, sometimes clearly, with full accusations, sometimes subtly, buried in notes about land disputes or marital scandals. This house persists in old superstitions. This family clings to pagan rites. This man refuses the authority of Rome. On the surface, it was harmless. Between the lines, it was deadly. The ledger was not meant for public eyes. It was read by bishops, by inquisitors, by papal envoys who travelled with the authority to condemn. A noble whose name appeared might find himself summoned to trial. A monastery tied to the wrong bloodline might lose its privileges. A whisper of Merovingian ancestry could be enough to warrant suspicion, enough to dim torches in corridors when one passed. But the ledger was also a place of quiet rebellion. Some scribes hesitated. They left spaces blank, wrote initials instead of names, drew symbols that only they understood. A bee here, a spiral there, reminders that not all agreed with Rome's judgments. Even within the Vatican, doubt lingered. The people heard fragments of these accusations. Rumours spread of nobles exiled for secret beliefs, of abbots stripped of power for harbouring forbidden genealogies. Villagers whispered that their lord was punished not for crime, but for blood. Whether true or not, such whispers fed the myth of persecution, the idea that the sacred line was being deliberately suppressed. The ledger itself became legend. Some said it was bound in human skin. Others said it could not burn, that attempts to destroy it had failed, that the names written within were indelible, cursed to echo through eternity. Scholars dismiss these tales, but they miss the deeper truth. The ledger was never about parchment. It was about control. To list a man as heretic was to strip his power without sword or siege. To list a family was to weaken its claim across generations. and to hint at the Merovingians within its pages was to remind Europe that Rome feared their myth more than their armies. The heretic's ledger was never closed. Its pages multiplied across centuries, filled by careful hands, locked in vaults. It remains silent but dangerous, a record of fear disguised as faith. And somewhere within its lines, perhaps hidden, perhaps erased, lingers the trace of the long-haired kings. In the year's quiet hours, armoured riders moved in silence. Their cloaks bore crosses, their swords gleamed in moonlight, their saddlebags heavy not only with coin but with secrets. The Knights Templar were born to guard pilgrims, but they became more bankers, warriors, custodians of mysteries, and in their shadows, whispers of bloodlines grew. The Merovingian myth found strange shelter among these knights. Some said the Templars knew the line had not ended, that heirs lived hidden in valleys and towns. Others claimed they guarded documents proving descent, locked in chests carried from Jerusalem to France. The truth is buried in silence, but the rumours persist. The Templars built fortresses, not only of stone but of secrecy. They stored wealth for kings, coded records for nobles, and perhaps genealogies for families that dared not speak them aloud. If a Merovingian descendant lived, the Templars may have been the ones to protect him, financing his safety, escorting him across borders, hiding him in plain sight among pilgrims. Rome distrusted them. At first, the Church blessed their order, granting privileges and indulgences. But their independence grew dangerous. They answered to their own masters, held lands rivaling kingdoms, and kept knowledge in archives that even papal eyes could not see. The Vatican feared their silence as much as their swords. When the order fell, when its leaders burned at the stake, the accusations against them rang familiar. Heresy, secret rites, hidden truths. Some said they worshipped strange gods, others that they spat on the cross. But beneath the charges lay a simpler threat. The Templars knew too much. They carried too many secrets. Perhaps among them, the greatest secret was that the bloodline of the long-haired kings had not ended. Legends grew after their fall. Villagers told of wagons of treasure spirited away before arrests. Some spoke of scrolls hidden in tunnels beneath Paris. Others of chests carried to Scotland, to Iberia, to mountain strongholds where knights continued in silence. Among the treasures were said to be genealogies, names, proofs. Whether true or myth, these stories burned as fiercely as the pyres. The Templars became shadows, an order erased yet remembered, condemned yet romanticised. And in those shadows, the Merovingian bloodline found refuge in imagination. If the Templars had indeed kept records, if they had protected heirs, then the Vatican's attempts to erase the dynasty had failed utterly. The truth may never surface. The knights left little trace, their archives scattered or destroyed. But in the silence, possibility endures, and sometimes possibility is more powerful than fact. The shadow of the Templars stretches long, and within it buzzes the faint echo of bees. High in the mountains, stone fortresses clung to cliffs, their walls blackened by fire, their chapels silent. Here lived sects the Church called heretics, Cathars, Waldensians, and others whose beliefs challenged Rome's monopoly. They built strongholds where armies struggled to climb, where their faith burned brighter than fear. And among their whispered teachings, some claimed connection to old bloodlines. The Merovingians appeared in these tales as symbols of lost purity, rulers chosen not by Rome but by God directly. Whether the sects truly sheltered descendants or only invoked the myth is unclear. But the association lingered. To stand against Rome was to claim a different source of authority, and no source was more dangerous than the idea of sacred kingship independent of papal blessing. When the crusade against the Cathars began, the mountains lit with fire, armies stormed fortresses, burned villages, slaughtered those who refused conversion. But fire does not only destroy, it reveals. In the ashes, legends took root. Survivors whispered that relics had been smuggled out before the sieges, that genealogies were hidden in caves, that heirs had fled into exile. The flames meant to erase them only made the stories stronger. One chronicle tells of a fortress where bees swarmed the gates during the attack, stinging soldiers until they fled. Another of a hidden chapel painted with lilies, but in its deepest corner, a single bee carved into stone. Symbols persisted even when people perished. The Vatican declared victory, yet the mountains remained restless. Songs carried by shepherds spoke of a lineage never broken, of kings who would return. Pilgrims heard these songs and carried them elsewhere, spreading the myth farther than Rome could suppress. The mountain flame consumed many lives, but it could not consume memory. Fire burns parchment, but it cannot burn blood. It cannot burn whispers passed from mouth to ear, night after night, generation after generation. The Merovingian myth survived the mountains, stronger for the persecution, and the Vatican, though it silenced villages and razed fortresses, could not silence the echo. The flame that destroyed also illuminated. It revealed a truth Rome wished forgotten, that people believed in a line older and holier than papal crowns. The mountains still hold ruins. Stones charred centuries ago lie scattered, silent witnesses to fire. But in the wind that sweeps those cliffs, some say they hear the hum of bees, faint yet unbroken, carrying forward the lineage the flames could not erase. The abbey stood like a stone guardian on the edge of the forest, its bell silent, its cloisters overgrown with ivy. Travellers passed it quickly, whispering that monks once kept secrets here too dangerous for Rome to permit. They said the silence of the abbey was not holy, but imposed, that what had been spoken within its walls was meant never to reach the ears of the world. Monasteries were more than houses of prayer. They were archives, treasuries, and fortresses of memory. The Merovingian bloodline, hunted in court and cloister alike, sometimes found refuge in these places. A hidden son, left as an oblate to serve God, was in truth a king's heir. A forgotten daughter, veiled as a nun, carried blood as precious as gold. The abbey sheltered them, fed them, recorded their existence in coded script. Rome feared such places. To the Vatican, an abbey outside its absolute control was dangerous. Knowledge hidden behind its walls might contradict official chronicles. Relics stored within might prove claims Rome denied. A genealogy inscribed by careful hands could threaten entire dynasties. And so, the abbey became a battlefield of silence. Sometimes the abbots cooperated. They sent their records to Rome or opened their libraries to inquisitors. Other times they resisted. Parchments were hidden in hollow walls. Scrolls were smuggled out under the robes of novices. Bees and lilies appeared in margins of psalters, symbols woven into illuminations where no bishop thought to look. Legends say one silent abbey in the heart of Gaul kept a complete record of the Merovingian line, unbroken from river father to last hidden heir. When Rome ordered its destruction, the monks dispersed, carrying fragments with them. Some buried scrolls in clay jars. Others carved names into wood and set it afloat on rivers, trusting the current to deliver memory to safer hands. The silence of the abbey was not emptiness, but resistance. It was a refusal to let Rome speak the only truth. To this day, ruins stand, their stones blackened by fire. But if you walk the cloisters at dusk, some say you hear chanting still, not prayers to saints, but names of kings, whispered against the wind, a litany of lineage preserved in the silence Rome could never erase. Every dynasty builds its legends of the hidden heir, the child who escaped the dagger, the youth raised in shadow until the time was ripe. For the Merovingians, this legend was not one story, but many. Each century retold it differently, each village claimed its own version, but at the heart of them all was the same truth. The line could not be broken. In some tales, the heir was spirited away at birth, his mother feigning his death to protect him. In others, he was raised by shepherds, taught to plough fields and herd cattle until the day his blood was revealed. Sometimes he was sheltered by loyal abbots who schooled him in Latin and scripture, preparing him for more than prayer. The church dismissed these stories as superstition, yet they spread too widely to silence. Pilgrims sang them on the road, minstrels wove them into ballads. A boy in Burgundy, a youth in Aquitaine, a novice in a distant cloister, any of them could be the heir. The uncertainty itself was power, for if anyone might be the bloodline's continuation, then Rome could never be sure it had destroyed it. Nobles invoked the hidden heir to stir rebellion. "Follow me," they cried, "for I fight in the name of the river-born king." Even when no heir appeared, the promise of one rallied men to arms. Mothers taught their children to expect him, to leave a place at the table, to recognize him when he arrived. Some claimed the Templars sheltered such heirs, others that mountain sects kept them alive in caves. Still others whispered that the Vatican itself held them, imprisoned in silence, too dangerous to release, too holy to kill. Each version carried the same weight. The blood lived on. What mattered was not whether the heir walked the earth, but that people believed he might. That belief weakened papal power, undermined rival dynasties, and kept alive the myth of sacred kingship outside Rome. The hidden heir was less a person than a flame, flickering, untouchable, but always able to ignite. Even today, stories linger. Genealogists trace families to obscure branches. Old manuscripts hint at names concealed. And in the imagination of those who resist authority, the hidden heir still waits. Not in castles, but in shadows. Not with crown, but with blood. The line, they say, cannot die. In candlelit chambers, monks dreamed. Some dreams were visions of angels, others warnings of judgment. But among them were dreams filled with strange kings, bees, rivers, and crowns. These dreams were recorded in secret books, read only by the daring, studied by those who believed the night revealed what parchment concealed. Dreams became detectives when history was blurred. If charters were forged, if genealogies were hidden, if heirs were silenced, then visions served as guides. A dream of long hair uncut, flowing like water, was taken as proof the line lived still. A dream of bees swarming a crown meant the blood had not been broken. The Vatican tried to control such interpretations. Rome sanctioned visions of saints, but frowned on dreams that spoke of dynasties. Yet the people trusted dreams more than decrees. A peasant woman might wake and declare that she had seen a child crowned in her sleep, and her village would whisper that the heir was alive. A monk might record a dream of a golden seal broken by fire, and others would nod, knowing it meant truth suppressed would one day return. Dreams travelled like rumours. They crossed borders, carried by pilgrims, retold by minstrels. They became more than sleep, they became testimony. In an age where parchment burned and scribes betrayed, dreams were incorruptible. They could not be silenced, for they belonged to anyone, anywhere. The Merovingian myth thrived in these nocturnal visions. Each dream added another layer to the story, another thread to the web of memory. The people called these dreamers detectives, seekers of what could not be found in daylight. Their evidence was not ink but symbol, not record but vision, and yet it convinced, often more deeply than charters could. The Church condemned such practices as superstition. Yet even within cloisters, monks wrote their dreams carefully, hiding them between psalms, sketching symbols in margins. They too longed for truth the Vatican sought to erase. They too believed that the night revealed what the day denied. Thus the dream detectives preserved the line, not with parchment, but with vision. They turned sleep into testimony, silence into revelation. And, through them, the myth of the forgotten bloodline endured, pulsing not only in veins but in dreams that crossed centuries, waiting for someone to listen. The codex was small, bound in leather, darkened with age, its pages filled not with words alone but with shapes. Circles overlapped triangles, spirals ran into squares, stars nested within stars. At first glance, it looked like idle sketches of a monk's hand. But to those who studied, it was a map of meaning, a language of geometry, hinting at truths too dangerous to spell outright. Sacred geometry had always whispered through Europe. The arches of cathedrals rose on ratios that echoed seashells and galaxies. Labyrinths, carved into church floors, mirrored spirals of creation. Builders claimed inspiration from heaven, yet some said these designs carried older knowledge rooted in bloodlines. The Merovingians were tied to this codex in legend. Their kings, it was said, understood the patterns of bees and lilies, of hives and rivers, and saw in them more than nature. They saw order, destiny, the divine plan etched into creation itself. Their descendants, scattered and hidden, carried this understanding in secret. The codex was their key. It was not a book to be read, but to be experienced. To trace a spiral was to recall descent from a river father. To follow a triangle was to remember the trinity of ancestry, royalty, and divinity. To rest one's eyes on a circle was to know the bloodline had no end. The geometry was code concealing names, dates, genealogies, yet also more. It was meditation, a way to hold the memory of the line without words Rome could condemn. The Church viewed such codices with suspicion, too abstract to call heretical, too mysterious to burn outright. They were tolerated, yet distrusted. Bishops muttered about pagan remnants, about dangerous symbols smuggled into Christian art. Yet cathedrals rose with these same forms, proving that what Rome condemned, Rome also relied upon. Stories tell of a monk who carried such a codex through wars, hiding it in cloisters, smuggling it across borders. He never read it aloud, but he taught disciples to copy its shapes into stonework, into floor tiles, into windows of coloured glass. The codex became invisible, scattered across Europe in fragments of architecture. To walk through certain churches was to walk through its pages. The people never knew the full meaning, yet they felt it. Standing beneath vaults patterned with sacred ratios, they sensed harmony, destiny, something more than stone. They believed they were in touch with heaven, yet perhaps they were touching something older, a memory of a bloodline hidden in geometry, preserved in silence. The codex survived because it could not be erased. A word can be struck out, a name can be erased, but a spiral cut in stone, a ratio woven into vaults, these endure. And so the bloodline, once threatened with silence, found voice in pattern. In the geometric codex, forgotten kings whispered still. At night, villages fell quiet, hearths dimmed, fields emptied, doors latched. But beneath this silence, another rhythm pulsed, not only in one house or one town, but across Europe. A shared hum of thought, dream, memory. The collective consciousness, though unnamed, was felt. It was the invisible thread binding people to one another, carrying stories farther than any monk's quill could reach. The Merovingian bloodline lived in this pulse. Even when erased from charters, it endured in memory, carried by song, tale, rumour. A shepherd in the Pyrenees might hum of a king with bees in his crown. A merchant in Lombardy might tell of a hidden heir protected by knights. A midwife in Brittany might whisper of children born with the mark of sacred hair. These fragments joined in the collective, weaving a tapestry of belief stronger than parchment. Rome understood the danger. It could control charters, chronicles, decrees, but it could not control the pulse of a people, for when enough voices believed, belief became truth, and truth, in turn, became power. The Church tried to redirect the pulse towards saints, relics, Rome itself, yet the hum of the bloodline persisted, soft but steady, like a heartbeat. The collective pulse carried not only stories, but symbols: bees, lilies, rivers, crowns. These images resonated across borders. People who never met, who spoke different tongues, still dreamed the same symbols. They arose in visions, in art, in lullabies. They spread like pollen, carried by winds unseen, and through them the memory of the Merovingians stayed alive. Scholars call it superstition, yet it moved armies. During uprisings, peasants cried not only for bread, but for the return of the rightful line. During famines, they prayed not only to saints, but to forgotten kings. The pulse-shaped choices, altered loyalties, created possibilities Rome could not predict. One chronicler wrote of an uprising where no leader was named. Instead, people acted as if guided by one will. They claimed they had dreamed the same dream, heard the same voice, seen the same vision of a crowned figure walking among them. The uprising failed, crushed by soldiers. But the pulse survived, stronger than before. Even in quiet times, the collective consciousness carried memory. When mothers sang to their children, when farmers blessed their fields, when brides whispered vows, fragments of the bloodline surfaced. It was not a conspiracy, not a plan, but an instinct, as if memory itself had woven into the fabric of human thought. And so, while Rome guarded vaults and locked away charters, the people carried memory in their own hearts. The collective pulse was unarchived, unwritten, uncontainable. It hummed in silence, waiting for moments to surge, reminding the world that forgotten bloodlines never vanish. They echo in us all. History is a workshop, filled with chisels, hammers, quills, and fire. What is remembered is carved, copied, repeated. What is unwanted is filed away, erased, reshaped. The Vatican became the master of this workshop, revising the past to secure the present. Yet revision leaves marks, like scars on wood. Look closely, and the old grain shows through. The Merovingians suffered most in this workshop. Their myths of sacred ancestry, their bees, their river father, all trimmed, reshaped, replaced by lilies and papal blessing. Chronicles once praising them were recopied with new emphasis. Saints were credited for victories once claimed by kings. Failures were exaggerated, virtues diminished. The line was rewritten into weakness, idleness, corruption, but revision is never perfect. In margins of manuscripts, scribes left hints, dates that contradicted, names that reappeared, genealogies too tangled to erase. A careful reader could see the hand of the workshop at work. One chronicle might call a king slothful, another, written earlier, praised his wisdom. One record might declare the line ended. Another, hidden in a charter, listed children unacknowledged. The workshop of revision relied on silence as much as ink. Whole years were left blank. Certain battles vanished. Certain heirs disappeared without explanation. Rome counted on forgetting to finish the work, for what is not repeated dies in memory. Yet forgetting is fragile. A single uncovered document, a single folk song, could unravel the story. Thus the revision never ended. Each century added new layers. The Carolingians revised the Merovingians. The Capetians revised the Carolingians. Rome revised them all. And beneath, the truth pulsed, stubborn as ever. Legends say one workshop still exists beneath Vatican stone, where scribes erase and rewrite even now. They say the tools are ancient knives that scrape parchment, lamps that scorch ink, stones that grind words away. Whether true or not, the image endures. A place where history itself is cut and stitched like cloth. The Merovingians remain victims of this craft, but also victors. For the very need to revise proves their power. If they were irrelevant, why erase them? Why replace bees with lilies? Why silence charters? Why hide genealogies? The workshop betrays its own fear. The bloodline mattered, and perhaps still does. History is never finished in this workshop. It is always being reshaped. Yet the old marks remain, waiting for eyes to see. And in those marks, the forgotten kings live on. The chamber was not a room of gold or relics, but of light, simple walls, a wooden table, candles burning low. Yet those who entered claimed to feel their burdens soften, their doubts ease. It was said this chamber taught kings and monks alike the secret of survival, gratitude. For the Merovingians, gratitude was more than courtesy. It was shield and weapon. When kings faced betrayal, they gave thanks for loyalty still standing. When mothers hid their children, they thanked the river for its shelter. When the dynasty seemed crushed, gratitude became defiance. To thank heaven for life itself was to remind Rome that the line still breathed. The chamber was a ritual space. Each evening, monks gathered not to petition but to acknowledge. They named blessings bread, water, warmth, lineage. Their voices rose in steady rhythm, weaving thankfulness into the stones themselves. Kings who entered felt changed, as though their crowns rested lighter on their heads. Nobles who plotted left with softened hearts, at least for a time. Gratitude disarmed ambition, if only briefly. The Vatican tried to claim gratitude for itself, linking it to saints and sacraments. But the Merovingians practiced it differently. They gave thanks not only to heaven, but to ancestors, to rivers, to bees. Gratitude bound them to the land, to their myth, to their bloodline. It reminded them they were part of something older than Rome. Stories tell of a hidden heir who survived because he practiced gratitude nightly. Imprisoned, shaven, stripped of title, he whispered, "Thanks for breath, for memory, for the blood in his veins." Guards mocked him, but he endured. When he escaped years later, he credited not weapons or allies, but gratitude itself, which kept despair from destroying him. Gratitude became contagious. Villagers whispered it in famine, thanking the earth though it gave little. Soldiers muttered it before battle, thanking their ancestors though defeat loomed. Gratitude spread like an unseen current, knitting people to one another, sustaining hope when Rome sought silence. The chamber survives now only in story. Yet its truth endures. Gratitude, once practiced by forgotten kings, remains the most unassailable fortress. No pope could erase it, no steward could corrupt it. It lived in the heart, in the breath, in the whispered thanks of those who carried sacred blood in silence. The night sky stretched wide, filled with stars like scattered embers. In such moments, people felt the world open, as though every road extended beyond sight, every choice led to another destiny. This was the portal of possibility, where the Merovingian myth endured strongest, not in what had happened, but in what could still be. For centuries, the dynasty was declared finished, kings dethroned, heirs shaved, brides married away. Yet always there lingered the sense of, what if? What if a child survived? What if a charter proved true? What if the bloodline returned? These questions kept the portal open. Possibility mattered more than proof. Rome insisted on closure, declaring the line ended. But the people resisted. They preferred open endings, stories left unfinished. A bloodline in shadow could return. An heir hidden could emerge. The absence itself became presence. The portal appeared in dreams, in songs, in visions of shepherds and monks. It appeared in politics too, when nobles threatened rebellion in the name of heirs not yet seen. Possibility became a weapon sharper than swords. Armies could be crushed, but hope could not. Philosophers later argued that all reality was layered in possibility, that every choice branched into countless futures. The Merovingian myth seemed to prove it. In one possibility, the line ended. In another, it thrived in shadows. Both lived in imagination, and imagination shaped reality. Legends tell of a chapel where the portal was painted in fresco arches, opening onto landscapes that stretched beyond time. Pilgrims came to kneel, asking not for certainty, but for hope. The fresco was destroyed in war, but its memory lived, reminding people that the bloodline's power lay in endless possibility. Rome feared this most. Certainty was its domain, dogma, decree, closure, possibility unravelled control. If people believed new paths always existed, papal authority weakened. Thus, Rome sought to shut the portal, declaring the bloodline finished. Yet, the more it insisted, the wider the portal opened in the minds of those who doubted. The Merovingians became eternal, not by rule, but by imagination. So long as possibility remained, so did they. And the portal, unseen yet enduring, stood open still. In ancient halls, scribes bent over parchment, their quills scratching ink across skin. Yet some said the true signature of kings was not written in ink, but in light, a radiance that marked their presence, a glow that lingered after they left. The Merovingians carried such a signature, or so the legends claimed. Descriptions vary. Some said their eyes shone, reflecting torchlight as though lit from within. Others said their hair caught the sun differently, glimmering like river water. Some spoke of a faint glow around their bodies during rituals, a sign of divine favour. Whatever the form, the people believed they bore a mark not of this world. The Vatican bristled at such stories. Light belonged to saints, to Christ, to holy relics. To grant it to kings outside Rome was dangerous. And so scribes recast the Merovingians as ordinary, stripping their light from chronicles, portraying them as idle, corrupt, unremarkable. Yet the people remembered otherwise. The signature of light became metaphor as much as miracle. It symbolized presence, charisma, authority that no crown could grant and no pope could revoke. A Merovingian need not speak loudly. His presence alone persuaded. A glance, a gesture, a smile carried weight greater than decrees. People followed not for law, but for radiance. Legends tell of a hidden heir revealed when villagers saw light flicker around him as he prayed. Another tale speaks of a queen who entered a church, and candles flared without touch. Skeptics call these embellishments, yet they endure, repeated because they explain what Rome could not erase, that these rulers carried something beyond politics, something luminous. Even centuries later, noble houses claimed traces of this light. Portraits painted with halos, seals stamped with radiant symbols, crypts designed with shafts of sun falling only on royal tombs. Each gesture kept alive the belief that the bloodline carried an inner glow. Today, the signature of light survives in whispers. Not literal glow, but the sense that some carry presence unexplainable, charisma that bends fate. The Merovingians were remembered not just for crowns or bees, but for this, a mark that Rome could not confiscate, a light that still flickers when their story is told. The cobbled street was quiet when the first sign appeared. A carving on a fountain, half worn by centuries, suddenly seemed clear. Bees clustered around a crown. Travellers stopped, murmuring. Was it coincidence or reminder? Days later, a sermon in a distant village spoke of lilies, yet the priest's voice faltered when he mentioned bees. The people whispered that symbols were speaking again, arranging themselves like notes in a hidden melody. Synchronicities surrounded the Merovingian myth. They came not as grand miracles, but as coincidences too precise to ignore. A pilgrim dreamed of a crowned figure, then met a stranger with the same name the next day. A noble sought guidance and found a forgotten charter, its seal faint but unbroken. A woman prayed in despair and saw a swarm of bees descend upon her window, hovering until her fears eased. The people believed these signs were orchestrated, not random. They saw them as evidence the bloodline endured, guiding from shadows, arranging the world like a conductor guiding instruments. Even when kings had fallen, even when Rome claimed the line was dead, the world itself seemed to play otherwise. Rome tried to suppress such interpretations. Priests called them superstition, coincidences twisted by longing, but suppression only fueled belief. For every denied sign, another appeared. Each was woven into memory, repeated in taverns, sung in lullabies, painted on chapel walls. Over time, these synchronicities became part of the myth. The bloodline was not only hidden in bodies, but in events, woven into the world itself. Every bee that landed on a crown of flowers, every child born with golden hair, every dream shared by strangers became evidence that destiny was not random but arranged. The orchestrated signs carried comfort. They reassured the people that the forgotten kings still watched, still moved through history unseen. They gave strength in famine, courage in revolt, hope in silence. And though Rome denied them, the signs persisted, whispering louder than decrees, echoing through time like a hidden song still being played. There are locks in history doors sealed by decree, secrets bound by silence, truths hidden in vaults. But there are also keys, not made of iron or gold, but of understanding. The Merovingians, it was said, carried such a key, a master key, unlocking more than kingdoms, unlocking memory itself. The key was not a relic one could hold. It was a realization that authority was not granted by Rome, but inherited through blood, myth, and presence. That destiny was not bestowed by papal blessing, but lived through ancestry tied to the sacred. To know this was to step beyond fear, beyond manipulation. It was to hold the master key. This idea terrified the Vatican, for Rome thrived on being the keeper of keys, keys to heaven, keys to salvation, keys to crowns. To admit that another key existed, older and independent, threatened its entire foundation, and so stories of the Merovingian key were buried, dismissed as heresy, rewritten as fable. Yet the people remembered. They told of kings who opened doors no one else could, of queens whose prayers bent storms, of heirs who carried unseen authority. They whispered that the key was not learned, not given, but recognized, a light that unlocked itself in those who carried the blood. Over time, the master key became symbolic of resistance. Rebels invoked it when they rose against corrupt lords. Scholars hinted at it in manuscripts filled with allegory. Artists carved it into hidden corners of cathedrals. A key tucked behind saints, a bee resting on its handle. The symbol survived, disguised in stone and song. The key was not only about bloodlines, but about consciousness. To believe one held it was to break free from control. To act without Rome's blessing, yet with certainty of destiny, was to wield the true power. Whether or not the key existed in physical form mattered less than the belief it unlocked. And so, the Merovingians became more than a dynasty. They became the reminder that keys lie not only in vaults, but in human spirit. That authority can be remembered, not granted. That truth cannot be locked away forever. The master key, whispered in shadows, turned silently through centuries, waiting for hands brave enough to use it. The final lesson did not arrive in battlefields or cloisters, but in understanding. To walk the path of forgotten bloodlines was not to cling only to ancestry or to mourn crowns lost. It was to awaken to see history as more than records, to feel lineage as more than genealogy, to recognize that the Merovingian story was never only about kings, but about the awakening of those who remembered. Graduation came when people stopped waiting for heirs to appear in palaces and instead saw themselves as inheritors. When villagers whispered their gratitude, when dreamers recorded visions, when rebels read signs in bees and lilies, they were living the bloodline. They were carrying the myth forward, not as subjects, but as participants. This was the true survival of the dynasty, not in vaults or charters, not in cloisters or marriages, but in consciousness. Each time someone believed the line endured, it did endure. Each time someone acted as if destiny was theirs to claim, the bloodline awakened again. The Vatican never understood this fully. It thought to silence by shaving kings, burning charters, rewriting chronicles. But the dynasty slipped through every grasp, graduating from flesh to myth, from history to memory, from rulers to dreamers. What was forgotten by decree was remembered in hearts. The graduation was not an end, but a transformation. The Merovingians became timeless. No longer bound to thrones or crowns, they lived in the unseen pulse of history. Their story became the story of every people resisting erasure, of every lineage denied yet remembered, of every truth silenced yet surviving. To graduate as awakened meant to see oneself as more than a pawn of decrees, more than a shadow in chronicles. It meant stepping into the role of creator, custodian, conductor of one's own history, to hold gratitude like shield, to walk through portals of possibility, to see signs orchestrated all around, to know the key lies within. This was the inheritance of the forgotten kings. And so the story closes not with silence, but with renewal. The Merovingians remain, not only in vaults, not only in myths, but in every whisper, every dream, every act of remembrance. The awakened dreamer, the awakened reader, graduates when they see themselves as heir. For the bloodline was never lost. It was waiting to be recognized. And now, it island. There are places in history where the record grows thin, where pages tear, where voices lower into whispers. This veil of obscurity is where the Merovingian line lingers most. Their names appear in charters, then vanish. Their symbols rise in stone, then fade. Their presence flickers like torchlight in mist, sometimes clear, sometimes gone. Rome depended on this obscurity. By drowning their story in silence, the Vatican hoped memory would fade. By leaving gaps, it forced later generations to fill them with its own versions. Yet, obscurity is not emptiness, it is fertile ground. In the absence of clear record, imagination grows wild. The people filled the silence with their own visions. A hidden heir escaping through forests. A queen smuggling relics across mountains. A monk preserving names in code. These stories grew in obscurity, unverified but alive. They mattered not because they were proven, but because they refused erasure. The veil also protected. An heir unknown could not be hunted. A genealogy unrecorded could not be burned. Silence itself became a shield. Families carried their ancestry in memory, passed from mother to daughter, whispered in lullabies. Never written. To Rome, these heirs did not exist. To the people, they endured in secrecy. Travellers spoke of villages where the name of the forgotten kings was never uttered, yet their symbols adorned door frames. A bee carved above a threshold, a lily hidden in embroidery. Obscurity allowed survival, for what was not spoken could not be accused. And yet, obscurity carried danger. Generations later, memory blurred. Descendants doubted their own stories. Was the blood truly theirs, or had myth replaced fact? The line risked dissolving not by Rome's decree, but by forgetting itself. Still, the veil preserved enough. The obscurity that Rome imposed became the very place where the line waited. Hidden in mist, unseen yet alive, the Merovingians remained. The veil was not an end, but a pause, sheltering the bloodline until eyes willing to see passed through the fog. Maps cover the world in lines and borders, yet what they reveal is never the full truth. The cartographers of the Merovingian era were not only drawers of land, but keepers of secrets. They charted rivers and roads, but they also marked places where the bloodline was remembered. In their maps, bees appeared where others saw hills. A spiral denoted not a spring but a sanctuary. A star marked not a fortress but a monastery that guarded a lineage. These symbols were invisible to ordinary eyes, but to those who knew, they told of safe paths, hidden heirs, places where memory breathed. Rome saw maps as tools of empire, binding the world in lines of control. But the secret cartographers resisted. Their maps were alive, breathing networks of history and myth. They knew geography could carry story as surely as parchment. And so, when official chronicles erased the bloodline, the maps preserved it in symbol. One tale tells of a parchment carried across 3 kingdoms, unrolled only in darkness. It showed no borders, no kings, only rivers flowing toward a central crown. Another spoke of a map burned by Rome, yet its ashes, when scattered on water, revealed outlines glowing faintly before vanishing. Whether truth or fable, the stories remind us that cartography was never neutral. It was a battlefield of memory. The secret cartographers risked much. To be caught encoding symbols was to risk accusations of heresy. Some were imprisoned, others vanished. But their work endured in fragments, in stained glass resembling maps, in tiled floors patterned like rivers. in mosaics where bees hovered near unseen crowns. Generations later, scholars stumbled on these remnants and puzzled over their meaning. They saw artistry, geometry, curiosity. They missed the deeper truth that these maps were compasses of memory, guiding those who sought the line. The Merovingian bloodline may have lost thrones, but it gained pathways. The secret cartographers ensured the heirs could still walk Europe unseen, guided not by armies, but by maps alive with hidden signs. And in these quiet works of ink and symbol, the bloodline continued its journey across centuries. At dusk, voices rose from cloisters and chapels, chanting psalms in Latin, echoing against stone. To outsiders, the chants were the same across Christendom uniform. Controlled, Rome's voice carried on wind, yet within some choirs another layer lingered. Notes bent slightly, words shifted subtly, melodies embedded with memory. The eternal choir was more than music. It was a vessel for lineage. Families tied to the forgotten bloodline passed their story in song. A phrase about rivers slipped into a hymn. A melody shaped like a swarm of bees hummed beneath the main chant. To ordinary ears, nothing unusual. To those who listened deeply, the bloodline sang. Choirs travelled. Pilgrims carried melodies across borders. Nobles requested certain hymns at feasts, not knowing their hidden meanings. Children learned lullabies that echoed ancient chants, preserving memory without even knowing its origin. Music became archive, invisible to censors, impossible to burn. Rome controlled written words, vaults, decrees, but it could not silence every song. Priests might forbid a chant in one village, but by the next valley it returned. Monks might be warned against certain tones, but in their solitude they sang them still. The eternal choir spread, persistent, echoing in every land touched by the bloodline. Legends say that during one siege, defenders sang an old hymn, and bees swarmed the invaders, driving them away. Another tale tells of a queen who sang quietly to her child, and the torches of soldiers searching for them gutted out. True or not, the stories show the power attributed to song. The choir was not only in churches. Blacksmiths hammered to its rhythm, weavers worked to its cadence, shepherds whistled its refrains. It lived in daily life, in patterns of breath and labour. It was eternal because it belonged to everyone, not only to priests or rulers. Even now, echoes remain. Old folk songs carry fragments of chants long forgotten. Their words changed, their meanings blurred. Yet within them, bees still hum, rivers still flow, crowns still gleam faintly. The eternal choir has never stopped. It sings softly beneath history, reminding us that the forgotten kings live still, their memory woven into the very sound of the world. The river wound through valleys and plains, its current slow in summer, fierce in spring. To most, it was only water. To the people who whispered of the forgotten kings, it was more. They called it the River of Memory, for they believed every secret ever spoken along its banks was carried downstream, never lost, only hidden. The Merovingians were said to be born of rivers, their bloodline tied to water as origin and destiny. Even when Rome denied the myth, the people held to it. They saw the river as witness, keeper of truths erased from parchment. If a king was murdered, the river remembered his last cry. If an heir was hidden, the river carried his name in ripples. Villages built shrines along its course. They left offerings not only for saints, but for kings unseen. Coins tossed into currents bore bees scratched crudely, lilies etched with knives. Children were told that if they whispered their family name into the river, it would carry it safely through centuries. To Rome, these were superstitions. To the people, they were sacred contracts. The river of memory flowed beyond borders. It crossed kingdoms, ignored charters, defied decrees. No crown could own it, no pope could silence it. And so, it became a natural archive, beyond the reach of revision. The people trusted water more than ink. They said, parchment burned, but rivers did not. Legends told of a hidden heir who walked its banks at dusk and heard voices rise from the water chanting names of ancestors. Another story claimed the river once ran red during a siege, not from blood but from the river itself, reminding soldiers of the line it had once birthed. Even today, rivers hum. Their sound is constant, repetitive, eternal. Perhaps that is why people linked them to memory. The Merovingians tied their fate to this eternal flow, and though Rome wrote them out of history, the river never forgot. It carried them still, murmuring beneath bridges, echoing through valleys, singing softly that the bloodline endures. In a dim hall of an old monastery, a mirror stood. Its glass was cloudy, its frame carved with bees and vines. The monk said it did not show the present, but the echoes of time. Those who gazed too long swore they saw not their own faces, but strangers with familiar eyes. Men crowned in gold, women veiled in silk, children marked with sacred hair. The mirror of time, they called it. Whether artifact or legend, the mirror symbolized what the Merovingians represented: reflection across centuries, continuity beyond eras. The bloodline was not confined to one age, but refracted, mirrored into many. To look into it was to see not one's own life, but the line itself. Rome condemned such ideas. The Church taught that time belonged to God alone, linear and controlled, beginning with creation and ending with judgment. But the mirror suggested otherwise. It hinted that time was layered, that the past never vanished, that forgotten kings still lived in reflections. Such beliefs undermined the Vatican's monopoly on eternity. The people embraced it. They told of visions in mirrors of bees hovering above crowns, of lilies blooming from wounds, of kings walking corridors long after their deaths. Mirrors hung in cottages, not for vanity, but for memory. Women whispered names of ancestors before them, hoping reflections carried the words into hidden realms. Children played at seeing heirs in their glassy depths. The Merovingian myth itself functioned like this mirror. Each generation gazed into history and saw themselves reflected, not clearly, but enough to believe. The kings of the past looked out from the glass, reminding those in the present that they carried echoes of blood and destiny. The mirror of time became metaphor. Even when no artifact remained, the people understood the truth. The past does not disappear. It waits, reflected in silence, ready to appear again when eyes are willing to see. And so, the Merovingians, declared ended, still stared from the mirror, reminding the world that time is never finished, only refracted. Stone carries sound. In vast halls, a whisper can linger long after the voice is gone. The resonance of kings is such a whisper, a vibration that continues, though the speakers themselves have vanished. The Merovingians were said to leave this resonance wherever they walked. Their presence hummed in walls, echoed in fields, lingered in bones of earth. When a Merovingian king spoke, the people believed his words shaped more than moments. They reverberated into the future, carrying force long after silence. Decrees may have been erased, charters destroyed, but the resonance endured in memory, in land, in air. Even centuries later, villagers claim to feel it, a heaviness in ruins, a hush in forests where kings once rode, a vibration beneath stones where they were buried. Rome denied resonance. The Church insisted that holiness came only from sacraments, not from blood or presence, yet people knew otherwise. They felt it in their bodies when they entered old chapels, when they touched worn stones, when they heard bees swarm in spring. They called it the resonance of kings, the unbroken hum of a bloodline that refused silence. This resonance shaped more than belief. It stirred rebellions, fueled uprisings, inspired songs. A shepherd claimed he heard it in wind and led villagers to resist taxation. A monk wrote of hearing it in midnight chants and dared to preserve forbidden genealogies. A queen declared she felt it in her heart and risked everything to protect her child. Even today, resonance lingers. Cathedrals built on Merovingian lands hum differently when choirs sing. Forests where heirs once hid seem alive with presence. Rivers where kings were crowned murmur louder at dusk. These are not facts Rome could record, but they are truths the people feel. The resonance of kings proves that bloodlines do not vanish. Their energy persists, vibrating beyond death, beyond erasure. The Merovingians may have lost crowns, but their resonance endures, humming beneath history, waiting for ears willing to listen. The labyrinth stood hidden beneath a ruined chapel, its entrance covered by centuries of fallen stone. To most who passed above, it was forgotten. To those who whispered of the old bloodline, it was remembered as a place of passage, a test of memory, a sanctuary of secrets. Labyrinths had always held meaning in Europe. On cathedral floors, pilgrims walked their winding paths as a form of prayer, but this one was different. Its passages were carved not for devotion, but for concealment. Within its twists lay chambers where parchments were hidden, where oaths were sworn, where children of sacred descent were taught who they truly were. The labyrinth of shadows was more than stone. It symbolized the fate of the Merovingians themselves, twists and turns, dead ends and hidden doors, paths leading into silence, yet always circling back to the center. The bloodline, like the labyrinth, could not be followed directly. One had to wander, lose oneself, and trust that the path would reveal truth. Rome feared such places. To the Vatican, labyrinths hinted at heresy secret gatherings, rites unsanctioned, teachings outside its control. And so, when rumours of the underground passage spread, soldiers were sent to seal it. Yet sealing stone does not erase memory. The labyrinth lingered in stories, its shadow stretching long. Villagers said those who walked it felt watched, as if eyes of ancestors gazed from the walls. Some spoke of hearing bees hum in the darkness, though no hive was seen. Others claimed to emerge changed, carrying with them knowledge they could not explain but felt in their bones. The labyrinth of shadows became legend. Some sought it as refuge during wars, believing it guarded those who carried the blood. Others saw it as symbol that the path of the line was never straight, never easy, always hidden in twists of history. And though the entrance lies buried, its story continues. For the labyrinth does not need walls. It lives in every search for truth, every struggle through obscurity, every return to the centre where memory waits. Councils are remembered for speeches, debates, decrees. Yet there was one council where no words were spoken aloud. They called it the Council of Silence. No records remain in papal archives. No charters bear its seal. Yet whispers insist it was held when Rome faced its greatest fear, the survival of the forgotten line. The council was said to gather in a vaulted chamber, lit only by candles. Cardinals, abbots, and envoys met not to argue, but to listen to silence itself. Each carried reports of heirs rumoured alive, of genealogies resurfacing, of songs too persistent to ignore, and in the silence they weighed their options. To speak was dangerous. Words could be copied, overheard, remembered, but silence carried intent without record. Heads nodded, eyes narrowed, agreements were reached without sound. The decision was simple. The bloodline must remain obscured, not destroyed, for destruction risked martyrdom, not acknowledged, for acknowledgement risked rebellion. Merely obscured, buried in silence, so deep it became absence. From this council, policies spread, charters vanished from monasteries, manuscripts were recopied with omissions. Families tied to the line found themselves discouraged from marriage, their lands quietly divided. None of this bore papal decree, but all carried the weight of Rome's unseen hand. Silence had spoken. The people sensed it. They noticed names fading from records, symbols disappearing from seals, songs forbidden at feast days. They called it the Great Hush. They knew it came not from chance, but from design. And though Rome denied the council ever happened, its echo lingered. The Council of Silence was never repeated. It did not need to be. Its decisions carried forward, enforced by habit, perpetuated by fear. And so, the forgotten line remained in shadow, not slain but smothered by absence. Yet silence itself is fragile. The more it is imposed, the more it invites curiosity. And so, the council achieved less than it hoped. By burying the line, it only deepened the mystery. The crown was gone, melted, stolen, lost to time. But the echo remained. People swore they heard it in the ringing of bells, in the hum of bees, in the rustle of trees. They called it the crown of echoes, a symbol of authority that no hand could hold but every heart could feel. The Merovingians wore crowns of gold, yes, but their true crown was never metal. It was presence, myth, lineage, resonance. When they fell, the gold was taken. But the echo stayed, vibrating through generations, shaping memory. The people said that whenever justice triumphed, the crown rang. Whenever tyranny fell, the crown hummed. It was not object but sound, not possession but atmosphere. Rome denied it, insisting crowns must be consecrated by the Pope, blessed with oil, legitimized by ritual. Yet the people trusted the echo more. They believed no pope could silence what still rang in air. The crown of echoes needed no anointing, no decree. It was carried in memory, in blood, in the simple faith that the line remained. Legends tell of rebels who heard it before battle and marched with courage, of queens who felt it while birthing children, knowing their heirs carried destiny, of peasants who claimed to hear it in the fields, reminding them they were not forgotten. The crown rang not only for rulers, but for all who believed. The Vatican tried to replace it with relics, but none carried the same resonance. Gold tarnished, oil dried. But the crown of echoes persisted, ungraspable, undeniable. Even now, in ruins where Merovingian kings once walked, some say they hear faint ringing at dusk, not bells, not insects, but something older. An echo that refuses silence, a crown that cannot be melted, a reminder that forgotten bloodlines still rule in ways no throne can contain. Beneath the stones of Europe, deeper than catacombs, older than crypts, whispers speak of hidden vaults. They are not marked on maps, nor listed in Rome's inventories, yet legends insist they exist chambers where the most dangerous records were placed, sealed away to outlast centuries. Among the documents said to rest, there are genealogies of the Merovingians. The Vatican guarded many vaults, but these were different. Some said they were built not by popes, but by kings, desperate to preserve what could not be spoken aloud. Others claimed the Templars carved them, filling their depths with scrolls brought from the east, bound in beeswax, marked with lilies. Whatever their origin, the vaults became symbols of forbidden memory. Villagers told of strange doorways, uncovered during construction arches, leading to staircases that descended into darkness. Workers reported vaults filled with shelves, yet before they could explore, soldiers arrived to seal them again. A few claimed to have glimpsed parchments covered in names, but the doors were closed and silence followed. Rome admitted nothing. Official records described only wine cellars, grain stores, burial chambers. Yet the persistence of rumour betrayed something more. For why would whispers of vaults echo so loudly if nothing lay beneath? Why would soldiers appear so swiftly if only dust was found? The people believed the vaults contained not only proof of the bloodline, but instructions for its return, prophecies, maps, oaths, seals. Treasures not of gold, but of legitimacy. If opened, they could overturn Rome's decrees, reignite loyalty to the forgotten kings, remind Europe of truths long buried. The hidden vaults remain unseen. Perhaps they lie sealed under cathedrals, their entrances disguised as altars. Perhaps they stretch beneath forests, collapsed but not erased. Perhaps they survive only in imagination. Yet the idea endures that somewhere, preserved in silence, the bloodline waits in ink and parchment, ready to be remembered. On a narrow road, winding through France, a pilgrim once carried a lantern that burned through storms, never extinguished. The people said it was no ordinary flame, but a light fueled by memory, guiding those who sought the truth of the line. They called it the pilgrim's lantern, and it became a symbol of the search for forgotten kings. Pilgrimages were common in Christendom, journeys to relics and shrines. Yet some pilgrims did not walk for saints or indulgences. They walked for memory. They sought places where the Merovingians once ruled, where whispers of their presence lingered. Their lanterns lit ruins, abbeys, riversides. With every step they kept alive what Rome tried to smother. The pilgrim's lantern burned with more than oil. It carried belief. Villagers along the way offered food, shelter, prayers, not because of relics, but because of what the pilgrim carried, hope that the line was not lost. Children followed, chanting songs of bees and lilies. Elders told stories they had hidden for decades. The lantern became a vessel for memory, passed from hand to hand. Rome tolerated some pilgrimages, but grew wary when lanterns multiplied. Soldiers sometimes confiscated them, calling them superstitious. Yet confiscation could not kill the flame. For the true lantern was never only fire, it was the will to remember. As long as pilgrims walked, the flame endured. Stories spread of lanterns glowing brighter near certain ruins, as if the land itself remembered. Others told of lanterns refusing to burn in cathedrals, built to erase the bloodline. Superstition, perhaps. But such tales gave strength to those who feared forgetting. The pilgrim's lantern became metaphor. Every act of remembrance was a flame. Every song, every carving, every whisper was light against silence. The Merovingians lived not only in vaults or genealogies, but in lanterns carried by ordinary people who refused to let memory die. And so, even in the darkest times, the flame burned. In a chapel seldom entered, hidden behind heavy doors, an altar bore an inscription so faint it could barely be read. It spoke of a benediction, not from Rome, not from bishops, but from kings themselves, a blessing passed through blood, whispered at coronations, spoken in silence at deathbeds. The last benediction, they called it. This benediction was no ritual oil, no papal decree. It was a vow that the line, whatever storms it faced, would endure. Fathers whispered it to sons, mothers to daughters, elders to heirs hidden in monasteries or villages. It was simple. You carry us still. Rome rejected such words. Authority, it claimed, flowed downward from heaven through the Pope, not sideways through blood. But the last benediction was not about authority. It was about survival. It reminded each heir that crowns could be stolen, lands divided, names erased, but the essence could not. Legends tell of a dying queen, betrayed by allies, whispering the benediction into her child's ear. Of a monk writing secretly at midnight, inscribing the words in margins. Of a soldier, exiled and wounded, repeating the benediction to himself as he bled beneath stars. The words carried no armies, but they carried endurance. The last benediction spread beyond the bloodline. Villagers adopted it, whispering it to children as protection. Rebels invoked it as oath. Even those with no claim to lineage felt strength in the words. For it was not only the kings who were forgotten, it was the people themselves, silenced by Rome, erased by chronicles. To whisper, "You carry us still," was to defy erasure, to affirm survival. Even now, the benediction lingers, perhaps not in churches, but in hearts. It is spoken when families tell stories that history has ignored. It is felt when people claim their past despite silence. It is remembered whenever forgotten bloodlines rise again in memory. The last benediction was not final, for nothing ends that way. It was a continuation, a promise disguised as closure, and in its whisper, the Merovingians live on, not only as kings of old, but as eternal voices reminding the world. We are carried still. In the corner of an abandoned field stood a stone, weathered and cracked, half buried in earth. To passers-by, it was nothing more than rock, but to villagers, it was the stone of remembrance. They said their ancestors had placed it centuries ago to mark a burial, a vow, or a secret tied to the bloodline. Stones remember in ways parchment cannot. They endure storms, outlast wars, resist fire. They carry silence yet hold presence. The Merovingians understood this. When words became dangerous, they used stones. A carved bee, a scratched lily, a spiral cut faintly into granite. These marks carried memory without need of ink. Rome could not easily erase them. Soldiers might smash a stone, but fragments still bore their message. Pilgrims visited such stones quietly. They knelt, not before saints, but before symbols. They pressed hands against the surface, whispering prayers of endurance. Some claimed they felt warmth in the stone, as if the bloodline's pulse lingered within. Others said dreams came more vividly after touching it, filled with visions of crowns, rivers, or faces unknown yet familiar. Rome dismissed these practices as superstition. Priests warned against venerating pagan stones. Yet the people persisted, for the stone of remembrance was not idol but witness. It testified to a past they refused to forget, a lineage they believed lived still. Legends tell of stones carried across borders in carts, disguised as building material, but secretly marking the path of heirs. Others tell of stones glowing faintly under moonlight, guiding travellers to hidden sanctuaries. Whether truth or imagination, the belief itself gave strength. The stone of remembrance endures even now. Some stand in fields, their carvings too faint to notice unless eyes look closely. Some rest in churches, reused as altars, their marks hidden beneath cloth. Some survive only in story, but their message is the same. Memory resists silence. The bloodline, like the stone, cannot be erased. It remains, waiting for hands willing to remember. At night, cloisters fall silent, lanterns dim, footsteps fade, prayers retreat into whispers. Yet in some monasteries, the people believed watchers remained monks, whose task was not only prayer, but vigilance. They watched not for intruders, but for signs of the bloodline. The watchers in the cloister lived between duty and secrecy. By day, they copied psalms, tended gardens, baked bread. By night, they read coded manuscripts, examined genealogies, whispered names of kings erased from chronicles. They did not defy Rome openly, but in silence they preserved what could not be spoken. Some watchers kept hidden books beneath floorboards, lists of descendants traced carefully in Latin script. Others guarded relics, a lock of hair, a broken seal, a coin stamped with bees. Still others offered refuge to heirs disguised as novices, raising them in cloister walls until it was safe to release them into the world. The Vatican suspected such practices. Inquisitors visited, demanding records, seizing libraries, interrogating abbots. Yet the watchers endured. They wrote with invisible inks, hid parchments in hollow statues, carved symbols into choir stalls. They believed they were not betraying Rome, but serving truth older than Rome. Stories tell of a watcher who rang the bells at midnight, warning villagers of soldiers arriving to capture a hidden heir. Another spoke of a monk who refused to burn a manuscript, instead swallowing strips of parchment to preserve names within his own body. Acts of quiet defiance, unseen yet powerful. The watchers in the cloister remind us that resistance need not be loud. Silence itself can guard memory. In their hidden work, they kept alive the bloodline Rome tried to erase. Cloisters became more than houses of prayer. They became sanctuaries of remembrance. And though many watchers died unknown, their legacy endures. Every time a forgotten genealogy surfaces, every time a symbol reappears in art or stone, we hear the echo of their vigilance. No crown remains of the Merovingian kings. Gold was melted, jewels scattered, treasures seized. Yet legends speak of a crown that still whispers. Not a crown of metal, but of presence, a circle of unseen power that clings to those who carry the blood. They called it the whispering crown. It was said that when heirs walked through villages, people felt it, a hush in the air, a sense of authority not explained by birth or wealth. Children stared, elders bowed, animals grew calm. No crown was seen, yet all sensed it. The whispering crown was not worn but carried, a mantle of destiny, invisible yet undeniable. Rome rejected such notions. Authority, it decreed, came only from papal coronation. Yet the people knew better. They had felt the whisper. They had seen how certain figures drew loyalty without decree, how presence alone commanded. They believed this was the crown speaking, reminding the world of a lineage not extinguished. Legends abound. A soldier in battle claimed to hear whispers guiding his hand when fighting beside a hidden heir. A queen, imprisoned, prayed for her son and heard the crown murmur, "Endure." A monk swore he heard it while copying texts, instructing him to preserve names in secret. The crown did not shout, it whispered, but whispers can outlast shouts. The whispering crown became a symbol of persistence. Gold can tarnish, jewels can be stolen, but whispers slip through chains, through vaults, through silence. They pass from ear to ear, generation to generation, until the crown itself becomes eternal. Even now, in ruins of halls where kings once sat, some claim to hear faint murmurs when the wind blows at dusk. Not words, but presence. Not sound, but memory. The whispering crown reminds us that authority cannot be erased by decree, nor silenced by Rome. It lingers, quiet yet unbroken, circling still around the forgotten bloodline,